Okay, imagine this. A country tucked right between two massive neighbors, China and India. For decades, it's been, well, walking this incredible tightrope of neutrality.
It really is a fascinating balancing act,
Yeah.
and that's just one piece of the puzzle we're looking at in Nepal today.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So this deep dive, for you, the learner, is pulling together insights from quite a few different places.
Right. We've got academic work on Nepal's ethnic movements, deep dives into the constitution, expert views on civil-military relations.
It's crucial geopolitical spot, and even what people are thinking right now from a recent survey.
And the goal really is to connect all these vital threads so you can quickly get a handle on the key forces shaping Nepal now and, where it might be headed.
Think of it as getting the key info without sifting through tons of material yourself. Okay, let's start unpacking this. Where should we begin? Maybe the ethnic movements.
Sounds good. What's really interesting there is how the focus kind of shifted over time. If you look way back, figures like Lakan Papa or the Newers Revolt in 1924, the emphasis was mostly cultural, preserving languages, traditions, that sort of thing.
But something definitely changed. It feels like the Second People's Movement back in 2006 was a real turning point.
Absolutely. That really pushed these groups, which had been more culturally focused, into a more political arena. They started really demanding social inclusion, trying to dismantle these old exclusionary systems.
And this wasn't out of nowhere, right? It had deep roots.
Oh, definitely. Tied into historical, political, economic inequality, often linked to the traditional caste system. After democracy was restored in 1990, and then with the Maoist conflict adding fuel,
Right.
these groups began demanding, well, equality, a fair share. So that cultural focus grew into actual collective action. And that's where organizations like NIFIN came, and the Nepal Adivasi Janajati Mahasangh.
Yeah, they seem like a pretty significant voice now. What are their main aims?
What's broad? On one hand, safeguarding culture, trying to revitalize traditional medicine, music, clothing, things like that.
Okay.
But also pushing for very concrete political changes.
Like what specifically?
Things like political reservations, ensuring they get representation, getting official recognition for all their different languages, and making sure education is available in mother tongues. They've even compiled this list of what they define as Nepal's different nationalities. And they consistently raise issues around human rights, protecting indigenous knowledge. It's quite comprehensive.
Now, one source mentioned something interesting with fundamental paradox. Can you explain that?
Yeah, it's this idea that despite Nepal having all this incredible ethnic diversity, historically, a pretty small group of ethnic elites, mainly the Bahan Chetri, have held a lot of the power in the state.
Even though they aren't the majority.
Exactly. And that historical dominance is, well, it's key context for understanding the grievances that fuel these movements.
Okay.
But it's not the whole story. There's also an anthropological perspective in our sources that suggests the ideology of the Janadati movement sometimes uses what they call outdated essentialist ideas about ethnicity.
Essentialist ideas, what does that mean, basically?
It's kind of the notion that your ethnic or caste identity is fixed from birth, that it dictates your culture, your role, maybe even where you belong geographically.
Ah, okay, like it's unchanging.
Sort of. And that contrasts with how many anthropologists see ethnicity today as something more fluid, shaped by history, involving cultural mixing and change over time.
So it's complicated. The movement has clearly done important work, raising awareness and pushing for inclusion.
Undeniably.
But there's also this academic critique about some of the underlying assumptions about identity, paints a fuller picture.
Exactly. The impact is clear, challenging old power structures, fostering more political competition, and often, as the sources show, it plays out as this tension. The state sometimes trying to suppress things, and then non-state groups like Nising organizing, bargaining, pushing back.
And this isn't happening in a vacuum, is it? Nepal's experience connects to things happening elsewhere.
Absolutely. If you zoom out, you see parallels with ethnic movements globally. Think about the Kurds, or the Quebec separatists, or the Zapatistas in Mexico.
Right. Similar themes.
Yeah, shared concerns about identity recognition, rights, getting fair representation within the larger country. Common thread.
Right.
Now, maybe we should shift gears to another foundational piece, the Constitution.
Okay, the Constitution, basically the rule book for the country. What are the key things we need to grasp about Nepal's?
Well, fundamentally, any constitution is that core legal document, right? It sets up the government, defines its powers, and outlines the relationship with the people. The main goal is to uphold things like justice, peace, security, good governance.
And the power comes from the people.
That's the crucial democratic idea, yeah. Sovereignty rests with the people. They grant themselves this constitution, ideally through consensus, as the highest law. Its legitimacy is key.
So how it's made matters a lot.
Hugely. Inclusivity, consensus that builds legitimacy. Nepal's journey to the current one, adopted in 2015, was long and pretty complex. Started way back in 2007 BS on their calendar.
What?
And this one's significant because it's the first one actually written by the sovereign people themselves. It's detailed preamble, 35 parts, 308 articles, 9 schedules, a lot in there.
What are the core principles driving it?
It really establishes constitutionalism, which basically means the government's power is limited by this document, by the rule of law.
So checks and balances.
Exactly. Protecting basic rights, making sure government operates with the people's consent, and, crucially, equality before the law. Everyone's treated the same under the law.
But like you said before, writing it is one thing, making it work is another.
That's the big implementation challenge, isn't it? The sources really stress this. Success isn't just the text or even how it was made. It's about how effectively it's put into practice day to day.
Have there been bumps in the road already?
Oh, yeah. There were amendments pretty early on.
Yeah.
And you see challenges pop up from disagreements between political parties, sometimes even external pressures or influences.
But the Constitution itself does have positive elements for moving forward.
Definitely. Our sources highlight things like provisions for regular elections, which is vital.
Right.
An independent judiciary, super important. Mechanisms for accountable governance, ways to actually amend the Constitution itself, steps towards proportional inclusion for different groups.
So trying to address that diversity issue.
Right. Guaranteed fundamental rights and an independent legislature to represent the people. These are all really important building blocks for a stable democracy. Okay, maybe we pivot now to civil-military relations.
Right, the relationship between the government and the army, that always sounds like a potentially tricky area. How's it been historically in Nepal?
Interestingly, the sources consistently describe it as cordial throughout history. The army itself changed a lot, from feudal origins to a more professional force, especially during the unification campaigns.
Cordial even through big political changes.
That's what's noteworthy. The army seems to have shown real impartiality, political neutrality, even during shifts like from the king to the ranas, the post-2007 democratization, even the overthrow of the monarchy.
They stayed out of the politics, mostly?
Largely, yes. Which brings us to this central issue of civilian control over the military. It's a key concept in democracies.
How is that control understood? Are there different ways to think about it?
Yeah, the sources talk about two main approaches. There's the political one that focuses on the formal laws, the chain of command, regulations putting civilians clearly in charge.
Okay, the official structure.
Right. Then there's a sociological approach. This idea suggests that real control comes from integrating the military more into society, maybe blurring the lines a bit, perhaps through ideas like citizen soldiers.
And where does Nepal seem to lean, or where are the arguments heading?
Well, one author argues against creating a large reserve force, these civilian shoulders, as they put it. Instead, they advocate for keeping a highly professional standing army.
So quality over quantity.
Kind of. Though they suggest maybe citizen soldiers could be mobilized, but only in really dire situations, like a major threat to sovereignty. They call it a modern variation of the Shara system, referencing a traditional community contribution system.
Interesting.
And there's also talk about maybe needing a smaller military overall in the long run, but one that's super professional and ready for more than just traditional war.
And accountability is key here, presumably. Who decides what the army does, how much it costs?
Absolutely essential. Transparency in defense spending, in planning that's emphasized strongly. The democratic government should decide the army's size, its doctrine, its budget, and the legislature should have oversight, confirm these things.
Makes sense. What about who gets to be in the army?
That's another important point, inclusivity. Making sure there are opportunities for people from all ethnic groups, for women, for transgender individuals, balancing merit with proportional representation, especially at the lower ranks.
So reflecting the country's diversity within the military itself.
Exactly.
Yep.
And looking ahead, there's even discussion about modernization, possibly adding higher-grade artillery, maybe even exploring nuclear capabilities down the line for Nepal's defense.
Wow, okay. That's definitely forward-looking. Now, let's shift again. We mentioned Nepal's location earlier, stuck between giants.
Yeah.
How does that geography play out?
Its location is just critical. You can't understand Nepal without it. It's right there, feeling the pull of competing interests from China, the U.S., and India.
Three major powers focus on this relatively small country.
Right. China, sources say, is worried of too much U.S. involvement. The U.S. worries about China's impact on democracy there. And India, naturally, wants to maintain its traditional influence in the region.
It sounds like a nonstop diplomatic challenge.
It really is, which is why Nepal has this long-standing policy of neutrality, non-alignment. It's been their guiding principle for foreign policy for a long time.
And economically, how does the geography impact things?
Huge dependence on neighbors, especially India, for trade, for transit routes to the sea. Historically, it was a transit route between China and India too, though that's been affected by border issues and agreements over the years.
I've also heard about Nepal's potential for hydropower. That seems like a major internal resource.
Ah, yes. And that's a classic paradox. Nepal has immense hydropower potential, theoretically, but it actually struggles to meet its own energy needs.
Why is that, if the potential is there?
It's complex. Lack of financial resources, lack of human expertise sometimes, plus the high costs of these massive projects. And investment risk is a big factor. Regulations might change. Getting local communities on board can be hard.
So investors get nervous.
Sometimes, yeah. They might prefer shorter-term investments rather than the huge long-term commitments needed for major hydropower projects.
So it's about navigating these big external power plays while also trying to leverage internal resources against significant hurdles.
Precisely. The sources really underline how carefully Nepal needs to tread, balancing India's concerns about its ties with China, especially with the Belt and Road Initiative. The suggested approach is basically be open, try to maintain geopolitical objectivity, and really foster mutual understanding with everyone involved. It's a constant balancing act.
Okay, finally, let's get a sense of the mood inside the country. You mentioned that recent survey, The Politics of Discontent, from early 2025. What did it find?
Yeah, this is from the Sharecast Initiative, Nepal. And the findings were pretty stark, actually. A huge majority, 68%, felt the country is heading in the wrong direction.
Wow, over 2/3. That's significant dissatisfaction. Only 16% thought things were going right.
Exactly. Very strong sentiment.
What are people pointing to as the main reasons for feeling that way?
The big things are perceived corruption and just fundamental problems with politics and how the country is governed. A lot of people feel the political establishment, the same few leaders and parties, haven't really delivered.
Is the economy a factor too?
Definitely, though maybe slightly less overwhelmingly negative. Still, 54%, over half, thought the economic situation was bad. And there's also this interesting undercurrent where some people blame a lack of civic awareness among the public itself.
But you said when they compared now to 5 years ago, the picture was a bit different.
Yeah, that was interesting. About half, 50.5%, actually felt things had improved over the last 5 years. They often mention infrastructure, like roads or better services.
So some visible progress.
Seems like it. But here's the twist. An even larger group, 56.9%, felt their personal economic situation had improved.
Okay, so people feel they themselves might be doing a bit better, but they're still unhappy with the country's overall direction.
Exactly. It suggests this disconnect. Individual progress, maybe, but still a sense that the nation as a whole isn't on the right track.
Does this unhappiness vary, like, between different groups of people?
It does. Younger people, for instance, tend to be less unhappy. They're also more likely to appreciate the positive changes over the past 5 years compared to older folks.
Interesting. What about other factors?
Discontent also correlates with gender. It's more common among men. Education level matters. People with higher education tend to have a more negative view. And income, somewhat counterintuitively, richer people reported being more unhappy with the country's direction.
Despite all this dissatisfaction, you mentioned the economy does have some bright spots. Resilience.
Yeah, that's true. Remittances, money sent home from Nepalists working abroad, are a huge factor. And the hydropower sector is growing. Those provide some stability.
But there are warnings, too.
Oh, yes. The survey authors caution that ongoing issues like corruption, bad governance, weak institutions could really undermine those strengths. Plus, there are growing worries about national debt sustainability.
And did the survey pinpoint what people see as the single biggest problem?
It did. A clear majority, 61.2%, said the lack of jobs is the main issue facing Nepal right now.
So even if the overall economy shows some resilience, finding work is the top concern for many.
Seems that way.
Now, historically, how does this kind of public discontent translate into actual political change in Nepal? Does it directly drive reform?
Well, history suggests it's often more indirect. Major political shifts have frequently come about through deals made among the top leaders, or sometimes through specific youth-led movements.
Not necessarily just a direct response to general public opinion polls outside of election time?
Not typically, no. It seems the connection between broad public sentiment and concrete political change is, well, more complex in the Nepalese context.
Okay. So pulling all these different strands together then for you, the learner. We've touched on the complexities of ethnic identity, the whole journey of the Constitution, writing it, implementing it.
The civil-military relationship, historically stable, but with ongoing questions about control and professionalism.
The unavoidable pressures of Nepal's geography, being squeezed between giants.
And now this clear undercurrent of public unhappiness with corruption, governance, and lack of jobs, even if people see some personal progress.
The real aha moment here maybe is seeing just how linked all these things are, isn't it?
Absolutely. You
Yeah.
can't really understand one area without seeing how it connects to and influences the others.
Yeah.
It gives you a much richer, more complete picture of what's shaping Nepal now and, well, likely its future too.
So that leaves us with a final thought for you to ponder. With all these different forces pushing and pulling, ethnic dynamics, constitutional hopes, military roles, geopolitics, public mood, what single factor do you think might be the most critical one in shaping Nepal's stability and progress in the coming years?
Yeah, something to think about. Hopefully this deep dive has given you a solid grounding in these complex issues, and maybe it sparked your interest to explore some of these areas even further on your own.